This video was brought to you by Squarespace. If you wish to learn how to develop your own website and take your business to the next level, then stay tuned for more details. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a brand that is almost 40 years old and has been reinvented numerous times in its lifespan. If I had to guess, I'd say the Turtles are the most recognizable superhero brand that exists outside of the Marvel and DC camps. I'm sure that's up for debate because I'm just making a guess when saying that, but still. It should probably go without saying that my favorite version of the Turtles is the show that aired on 4Kids from 2003 to 2009. I mean, have you ever watched this channel before? But this isn't just my favorite version of the Turtles, it's one of my favorite shows. My first upload on YouTube, or at least the first video uploaded to Jay's Reviews, was a picture-based video complaining about the DVD releases of the 2003 series, a video that dropped on November 8th or 9th of 2015. I don't remember which, but it was definitely one of those two. Over 5 years later, I think it's time to give this show the attention it deserves. But to discuss the importance of the 2003 series, I think a little backstory is due. The most iconic version of the Turtles is the cartoon that debuted in 1987, but this is not the first version of the TMNT. That goes back 3 years earlier, 1984. Comic books were becoming a lot more serious, and the Frank Miller books about Daredevil and Ronin were particularly interesting to creators Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman, who drafted the design for a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle that evolved into a group of ninjas, Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello, and Michelangelo, called the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. A book that got published in May of 1984. A book intended to be a one-off parody of contemporary comics that actually took off. The book was a hit with comic book readers, and with their new company, Mirage Studios, Eastman and Laird went on to further develop the Turtles in follow-up comics and got to produce merchandise like a role-playing game and minifigures from Dark Horse. But with the comic expanding its popularity each and every day, the creators wanted to branch out into other media. They approached Playmates Toys for an action figure line, and the company was unsure of how worthwhile the brand was given its ultimately niche status. If they were going to make these figures, they wanted a television show. And thus, the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from Fred Wolf Films was born. To say it was a hit would be quite the understatement. The series debuted with a 5-episode miniseries showcasing the origins of the Turtles, their master Splinter, their human friend April, and their villain, the Shredder, all elements originating from the comic series, but heavily reinvented for a younger audience. This version of the TMNT is the one that created many of the staples you'd think of with the group today, like Leonardo being the determined leader, Donatello's being a gifted inventor, Michelangelo's being the life of the party, and... well, in this version, Raphael is more sarcastic than angry, but still. The comic was printed in black and white, but whenever the art was in color, each of the turtles had red bandanas. To help the kids understand the difference between the characters just by looking at them, Leonardo wears blue, Raphael keeps the red look, Donatello wears purple, and Michelangelo wears orange. Each of the turtles also wears belt buckles with their initials on them. The intro establishes everything you need to know about how the series works, becoming instantly iconic as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were arguably the most popular kids icon of the late 1980s and early 1990s, with millions of those action figures and game cartridges sold, as well as countless tokens consumed with the arcade games. The cartoon got a second season in 1988, ultimately running for 10 seasons, with the final one airing in 1996. When you have a brand as hot as this one was, there's only one place to go from the small screen, and that's live action. In 1990, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles made their debut on the big screen in a film that still holds up to this day. A strength of the film is that it does use established tropes from the cartoon, but it also took the more serious side of the brand from the comics and told a heartfelt story about family, really bringing these characters to life with the excellent animatronics from Jim Henson. The film was a hit at the box office and further cemented the Four Terrapins' place as a pop culture icon. The film got a sequel in 1991, Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze. This one was also a hit, but not as much as the first one. The original got a lot of depth out of not being a cartoon, but parents apparently complained about the film being too violent, so in the sequel they made it a lot more like the cartoon, where the turtles don't use their weapons much at all when fighting. They clad the Shredder in purple instead of red to match the cartoon, and Shredder's paired up with mutant henchmen like the cartoon. Being more like the show isn't a bad thing inherently, but I just think those changes made the movie less appealing than the first one. But we still ended up with a sequel 1 year later, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: Turtles in Time. By this point, the quality in the animatronics as well as the heart of its story and talent in its filmmaking had dropped significantly. In fairness, I didn't watch the whole thing again when gathering footage for this video because this movie was terrible. A hackneyed story and lame jokes made it so that this film got raked over the coals by the critics, making even less money than the second film. Some have a fondness for it, which is understandable, but on the whole, I'd say this film is widely considered one of the worst outings for the Turtles. By 1992, I think it was safe to say that the Turtles were experiencing some diminishing returns. The cartoon was still running, but by the early 90s, the biggest cartoon mascot was Batman, thanks to the Tim Burton films and the excellent Batman the Animated Series. With each Turtle film earning less than the previous one, you'd have to wonder if the Turtle Mania was going to leave a lasting impact or be a passing fad. Speaking of Batman the Animated Series, it debuted the same year as X-Men's animated series, both of which were popular because they told stories with more heart and depth than previously thought possible in cartoons. In response, the 8th season of the Turtles dropped in 1994, and they set out to change things up this time. The art style changed, the Turtles were only seen grimacing, the sky is always red, and they tried injecting more story into it this time as the Shredder destroys the Channel 6 news building and the Turtles get introduced to the new villain, Lord Dreg, that takes Shredder's place as the main antagonist for the last 2 seasons. The intro music got changed, the intro itself cuts between new footage of the cartoon and the first TMNT film, almost as a way of showing how serious we are this season. However, the show was cancelled after 10 seasons in 1996. I remember liking these final seasons, but I'd have to watch it all the way through again to really give an opinion. Now, I wasn't there, and I wasn't there for the meetings that caused Season 8 to change tones, but like I said before, I think it's safe to say the brand was rolling back in popularity. It happens, culture moves quickly. Just look at how Star Wars was the most popular thing in the world in the late 70s and early 80s, but by the late 80s and early 90s, Star Wars took a back seat for other stuff like the TMNT. Having said that, in 1997, the world was introduced to what is definitely agreed as the worst incarnation of the Turtles ever made, Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, a fully live-action series that turned out as well as you'd expect. Just by watching the first episode, you can already see the most dated TV special effects, terrible acting, and shockingly lifeless suits for the Turtles. They decided to add a 5th and female turtle, something that the IDW books seem to have pulled off with greater success. The Next Mutation was the natural endpoint of what I was saying before. The brand was losing relevance fast, and a cheap-ass show like this is a desperate attempt to keep the flame alive, but it got cancelled after 1 season because the ratings were not high enough to make the show worth the cost it took to make. After that, the brand took a bit of a dirt nap for the first time in its life. I think this was for the best. Give the brand a break. The audience they had in 1987 was just not interested 10 years later in something like this. What I think the brand was in desperate need of was first, time off, which it got, and second, a full-budget modernization, rebuilding the Turtles from the ground up for a new generation, leaving the past behind. And on February 8th of 2003, that's exactly what we got. The 2003 series, a comeback 5 years in the making. This time around, Peter Laird, one of the co-creators of the Turtles, was heavily involved in producing the new series. The intent was to take the style of the comics with the nighttime setting, the heavy usage of shadows in the animations, and pure white eyes of the characters with their masks on, and adjust that into a cartoon format with some of the staples from the original still in place, like the multicolored headbands and character personalities. It was basically trying to do what the movie was doing, only sticking more closely to the story of the comics. In 2002, it was announced that 4Kids Entertainment had the rights to the Ninja Turtles, and the show was going to premiere on the Fox box in 2003. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Sonic X were pretty big attractions for the network that both dropped in 2003. 4Kids had and still does have a negative reputation because they had the job of localizing anime, and they had a nasty reputation for censoring shows that they touched or just making changes that were unnecessary. But a strength with the Turtles was that this show wasn't made overseas and transformed by 4Kids, it was conceptualized right in New York City. By that, I just mean that the show wasn't altered to fit what the company thought a Western audience could handle, it was just created to be that. Doesn't really explain how they ended up getting away with what they did on this show, as we'll see. Maybe it's a cultural double standard, I don't know. But that's neither here nor there. This new version of the Ninja Turtles kicked off in early 2003 with the first episode that was appropriately titled Things Change. But before getting into any of that, I want to talk about the benefits provided to you by Squarespace, who's the sponsor of today's video. If you're someone who works on art, music, or video making like I do and need to show that work off to the world, having a well-designed website is a pretty critical part of the process. Squarespace offers users an incredibly simple to understand way of building their own website. What makes it so easy to use is the fact that they offer a bunch of different template websites to build yours off of. As you can click a few options that best describe what you want your website to be like, and they'll give you the templates that work best, or you could just start from scratch. Either way, you have plenty of options to work with once you actually get in, including dozens of different fonts, plenty of color schemes you can pick to make your website unique to you, even letting you use your own images to design a color palette, which is how I created this Jay's Reviews themed one. And there's an option to embed links to other websites, such as your other social media accounts, which would be crucial for someone who works on YouTube, for example. All this was made possible by Squarespace. For a free trial, go to squarespace.com. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/jaysreviews for a 10% discount on your first purchase. Once again, that's squarespace.com/jaysreviews. You can find that at the top of the description and by scrolling down and checking out the pinned comment. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the show. The first episode of the show is pretty simple at the end of the day, but that was the goal of the story it was telling. You begin with a stinger that's reminiscent of the first page of the original comic, setting this show up as a reboot of that story. After the intro, we see Master Splinter and the Turtles in the middle of an exercise that establishes the dynamic the students have with their master.
Too noisy, Donatello. Too clumsy, Michelangelo. Poor choice, Raphael. Well done, Leonardo.
The sewer lair they inhabit is then attacked by a bunch of tiny robots called Mousers that the heroes smash, but the lair gets destroyed as the Turtles must venture to the surface to regroup with Splinter. They are getting into a scuffle with the Purple Dragons gang, which escalates into a battle with a mysterious group of ninjas called the Foot, where the Turtles just barely make it out alive with the armored car they took from the Purple Dragons. They meet up with Splinter, find their new home, the end. Like I said, it's a pretty basic setup for the first episode, especially for a show tied to story and continuity, but you have to start small, and that was the purpose of the episode. They wanted to do a version inspired by the comics and introduce us to the heroes and villain, but almost as important, they wanted to leave the previous cartoon behind. All efforts you can see in the first episode. In the first episode, it's evident that they're still trying to find a definitive style for the show. The aim of this series was to be more action-oriented, and the first fight the Turtles have with the Foot is the big set piece of the episode. On the DVDs, you can watch how this sequence went from storyboards to animation to fully finished, and it's pretty cool. Compared to what the show would produce even later in its first season, it's nothing out of this world, but it sells you on the idea that these turtles are actually going to be in real battles with their weapons, and maybe they won't always win. So I'm sure they were proud of seeing that intent evident in the first episode. When I say they were still trying to find a style, I just mean there are some things that are exclusive to this episode that would later be dropped. For example, Donatello's bandana is shaded in black in this episode. When looking at the rest of the Turtles, they have the main color and a darker version of that color for shading, but you can clearly see for Donatello, it's black. I think it looks cool, but inconsistent since he's the only one that looks that way, except Leonardo in the last scene of the episode. I don't know when they decided to drop the idea, since it's changed as early as episode 2, but because it was an idea that reached as far as episode 1, that's how Donatello appears throughout the intro, which lasts for the first 3.5 seasons. There's also a brief bit where the Turtles actually run like ninjas with a full arm extension, another thing the series would drop later. Those being all the takeaways from the first episode, it got the train off the tracks and the momentum keeps up in episodes 2 and 3, A Better Mousetrap and Attack of the Mousers. These first 3 episodes form the first major arc of the show. The Turtles against their first threat, the Mouser robots built by Dr. Baxter Stockman and his assistant April. April's introduction shows the series' dedication to moving on from the first cartoon, where she was a news reporter, and that actually stayed true for the movie. This is April's story from the comics as she realizes that Dr. Stockman is really using the Mousers to rob banks in the name of some mysterious dude who the audience also saw at the end of episode 1. This leading to Stockman trying to kill April with the Mousers and her being rescued by the Turtles. Side note, Baxter Stockman is one of my favorite characters on the show, perfectly voiced by Scott Williams.
I do not tolerate failure.
Which is why you'd make a lousy scientist.
Speaking of voice acting, when bringing the brand to life for a new generation, the voices of the characters is an important part of that. Leonardo is voiced by Michael Centerniclass, Raphael by Greg Abbey, Donatello by Sam Riegel, and Michelangelo by Wayne Grayson. The only one of these guys I'm familiar with outside of the Turtles is Sam Riegel, thanks to his performances as Spider-Man in the Amazing Series tie-in games, Phoenix Wright in the latest Ace Attorney games, and Tennessee Kid Cooper in Sly Thieves in Time. If you were to judge these actors by how closely they sound to teenagers, this would be one of the many incarnations that doesn't really do that well in that regard. However, the cast does sound younger than the original shows, I'll say that much. Ignoring that, I love these voices for the Turtles, especially Greg Abbey's Raphael, as of all the versions that try to give Raph a New York-sounding accent, I think this one's the best.
My name is Raphael, and the bozo in the hockey mask is about to find out just how angry I can be.
None of the actors sound like the ones to come before, which I would assume is intentional. Sam Riegel said that he didn't listen to Barry Gordon's Donatello until after the first season of the new show was finished, as he wanted to find his own voice for Don. So at the very least, being familiar with what the previous version sounded like was not a requirement. Master Splinter is voiced by Darren Dunstan, whose voice evolves a lot as the show goes on, as does Wayne Grayson's Michelangelo. I'd assume if you're putting on a voice like this for an entire show's worth of recordings, you get more comfortable with it as you go along. April being portrayed by Veronica Taylor, and she sounds really down to earth in all her appearances in the show. These actors all bounced off one another really well, as the show was recorded as a group rather than individual actors doing their lines in a booth. With the main cast established, I can talk more about their first scene together in episode 3. Similar to the cartoon and the movie, April meeting the Turtles is a convenient way for the audience to learn the backstory. This series not telling you it until 3 episodes in, when April meeting the Turtles was actually the first thing to happen in the original show. Leaving it a mystery for 2 episodes makes you wonder what they're going to do with it. The 1987 show reinvented the backstory significantly as they made Splinter a human named Hamato Yoshi that got turned into a rat via a mutagen that the Shredder had. That ooze turned whatever species it touched into a cross-species version of whatever being touched it last. Sounds kinda weird to say out loud, but a human touching the turtles covered in the ooze made them humanoid turtles, and Yoshi's touching the ooze after touching a rat made him one. In this version, it's as you'd expect by now, the backstory from the comics and the film. The turtles were normal turtles, but fell into the sewers alongside an ooze canister that turns animals into humanoids. Splinter finding them and getting hit by the ooze turned them all into humanoids. I actually feel like Splinter having been a human that was a martial arts master before being a rat makes more sense than his being a normal rat prior to the mutation, but either is fine. Splinter tells April the backstory, but still leaves some of it up for imagination.
But how did you know martial arts?
That is a story for another time.
But by the end of episode 3, the Turtles and April have formed a new friendship and shut down the Mouser menace, with Dr. Stockman now having to answer to the mysterious client directly.
I'll be back at work, Monday morning.
You must pay the price for failure, Dr. Stockman.
This also being the moment that the boss learns that these karate frogs, or whatever it was that ruined his scheme from episode 1, are real, setting up for further episodes.
These are the ones responsible.
The next several episodes further explore the status quo of the series, as episode 4 deals with Raph's anger problems by pitting him up against the masked vigilante Casey Jones, who fights the Purple Dragons relentlessly because of how they burned down his family's store when he was a kid. Casey is voiced by Mark Thompson, who brings a lot of energy into the role. When he was with 4 Kids, he also became the voice of the Gun Commander in Shadow the Hedgehog, part of why I played this clip in that video. Casey is one of the central characters of the series, as he loves backing the Turtles as often as he can, being the most involved with Raphael. The episodes following his debut show his being introduced to Master Splinter and the Turtles' lair, as well as April and the argumentative relationship that they'll have throughout the series. By episode 9, you should be pretty up to speed on how the show works in terms of character dynamics and plot structure. The show tells one big story with little mini-stories within that also build off of one another, something that I can expand on when I get to season 2. Episodes 6 and 7 showing the Turtles facing off against the Foot once more, which leads to an important point. The good guys being well done is crucial, but what matters just as much is setting up interesting antagonists. I already mentioned Dr. Stockman, whose grandiosity is always entertaining to watch, but there's also an unpredictable element to his appearances, and I mean that literally. When you fail the Foot, you just get killed, like this Purple Dragon guy from episode 1. But Stockman is too useful to just kill, so he gets punished for failure. In his first reappearance following the Mouser incident, he's wearing an eye patch. Next time you see him, he's in a wheelchair and has a robotic arm. As dark as that might be, it makes him a character that really stands out. And the fact that it is so dark, while this weirdo simultaneously talks about it in such a mundane fashion.
This is Baxter Stockman. You've lost weight.
Makes it kind of funny. The lead muscle for the Foot is Hun, a new character created for this series, and he's heavily involved with what goes on. He's not only the second-hand man for the Foot, pitting him against the Turtles often, but he also leads the Purple Dragons, as he was the one to burn down Casey's father's store, giving him a personal connection with one of the heroes.
I ever tell you how much fun I had burning down your father's store when you were a kid?
At least I had a father, punk.
But of course, the most important villain in the series is the main antagonist, Oroku Saki, aka the Shredder. This guy's pretty bad news, obviously. The intro even says,
Watch out for Shredder!
but they wanted to build up to his fighting the Turtles. The differences with this Shredder compared to the one from the classic cartoon is a long list, but one of them is that this Shredder does not seek out the Turtles. The 87 Shredder is the reason why the Turtles and Splinter are mutants, and he had a rivalry with that Splinter. In this show, the Shredder's seeking an enemy, but that enemy is not the Turtles. The Mousers attacked the Turtles' lair because it was the Mouser field test, as they're designed to attack mice and rats, Splinter included. This incident forced the Turtles to the streets, where they happen to run into the Purple Dragons trying to steal money for the Foot. The Turtles just keep getting in the way of Shredder's plans, so they have to be dealt with. Something that's clear for Shredder after episode 6, where the Foot Ninjas track down an ancient artifact called the Sword of Tengu, which has the ability to track down other artifacts that, as Shredder says, share its unique origin. That leads the Foot to finding this busted up suit in the river. His goals in the first season are shrouded in mystery, but when it's revealed to him in episode 7 that the Turtles don't know anything about his enemies, he tries to use that to his advantage when we get to episodes 10 and 11, The Shredder Strikes Part 1 and Part 2. The episodes where the show really takes off. First, Leonardo gets schooled by Splinter on how weapons don't make for great warriors can make anything a powerful weapon. Was inclined to make a sly reference there, but I shall refrain.
Until you have learned this lesson, you have learned nothing.
Leo goes off on his own, and that's when he's invited to meet with Saki and join the Foot, as he tells a story about his fighting a corrupt and evil force that influences society through crime and political manipulation. Those forces being his mysterious enemies, who we meet for the first time on the rooftop nearby.
One of the turtles, Leonardo, has spoken with Saki, but we do not know the outcome.
Find out what the turtles will do. If they are with Saki, we may be forced to destroy them.
It's a pretty obvious fact that Saki is lying because he already has been established as the villain, but Leonardo doesn't know his story is bogus and that he's only describing exactly what he does. But at the same time, whoever these enemies are, they're clearly weirdos themselves. It's a really compelling story with the Shredder and the people he's seeking. I love this kind of world building where the turtles are not the center of the universe. They're walking into a story that was already unfolding without them. Master Splinter quickly informs the heroes of the truth, this being where we get the full backstory that was left ambiguous in episode 3. Splinter was a normal rat owned by a ninja master named Hamato Yoshi that he copied and learned all the moves from. One day, the Shredder attacked, accusing Yoshi of working for his enemies, and when he wouldn't talk, Yoshi got killed.
I will finish you myself.
We also get a bit of world building as we see Hun's scar was caused by Splinter. Also a nod to the movie, I'd say. It's the little things, you know? I think Splinter learning his moves by copying a human is something I'm more than capable of suspending my disbelief for. In fact, rats in real life are pretty loyal companions, but I just think Splinter having been a human makes a little more sense, like I said earlier, for what it's worth. Back on subject, here's a strength I think the writers got from adapting the material with one of the creators on board. The ability to improve upon the story. Splinter in most versions acts as the father of the turtles and they treat each other as brothers. They actually make Splinter more fatherly in this version's backstory by having him say this.
I never told you all this because I did not want your training to be tainted by the poison of hatred.
That's a direct change from the comic where Splinter explicitly says that he trained the turtles so they could fight Shredder and avenge Master Yoshi. In this version, he only trained the turtles so they could have the ability to defend themselves from any threat that would inevitably come as a result of them being mutant turtles. This all leads to a big fight on a roof where the turtles reject Saki's offer and battle the Foot once more, something they become quite used to, until Shredder appears. Another one of the biggest changes between the old cartoon and the new one is that this Shredder is meant to be an intimidating bad guy. We have already seen how casual he is about tearing his own people apart limb from limb, but this is backed up by his being the most powerful foe the turtles will face in the first season.
No more charades. You see me as I am, and it will be the last thing you will ever see.
The Foot Ninjas almost beat the turtles in the first episode, but Saki can beat multiple Foot Ninjas in just a few seconds, moving in a way that's almost beyond human, leading into this first fight where all 4 turtles get a combined total of 1 hit in on Shredder, one where he wasn't even looking. The rest of the battle plays out like this. The first building gets destroyed and the group separated as Splinter finds all of them. Before that, Leo gets introduced to one of the Guardians, a group devoted to protecting the people Shredder's out to find, leaving it at that. By the end of the episode, Shredder's about to kill the turtles, but Splinter jumps in and makes short work of Shredder as the heroes think it's over. If it wasn't clear already, I think this episode is fantastic. Every moment, every line, every punch is just stuck in my subconscious. The action has really picked up in quality since the first episode. We actually get to see Master Splinter in action for the first time, and he's way more powerful than the turtles at this point. The scope of the story has been expanded with the Guardians being introduced, but the best part was Scotty Ray as Shredder. In this first episode, he expertly plays the character as a master manipulator, a menacing villain, a hammy villain, and can do all those things even in a low voice. He's fantastic.
None of you will leave here alive.
And as the ending shows, he's clearly not done. But the show doesn't focus on Shredder for the next several episodes. Another difference in the original cartoon is that Shredder is an overarching threat with a big plan instead of the villain in most episodes of the new scheme every week. The Turtles in episodes 12 through 17 think that the Shredder is dead. In episode 12, it's mentioned that the Foot has a decreased presence since Master Splinter took out the Shredder, but we're reminded of the fact that he was up to something important in the Notes from the Underground arc. A 3-part episode where the Turtles investigate the crystals they found in their new lair and discover an ancient underground civilization filled with monsters. But more importantly, they also find an abandoned Foot genetics lab with archived footage from decades prior. Foot researchers turned normal people into monsters and sent them into the underground to find civilization, to find Shredder's mysterious enemies. But the project was abandoned when the city underground had nothing to do with whoever the Shredder's looking for. But this civilization did create the lair the Turtles currently occupy. The crystal light of the city can turn the monsters back into humans, but the second they leave, they become monsters once more, as the Turtles promise to come back one day with a cure for this condition. These episodes aren't my favorite to rewatch. It's a little slow. Mikey's being a coward isn't particularly entertaining after the first 5 minutes, but it is important for the story. When the Turtles return home, the Foot Ninjas are searching the sewers for them, as Master Splinter suggests that they relocate for the time being, living with April until the Foot are gone. Episode 16, The King, shows the status quo of the group living at her place, with a nod to the movie when the Chinese delivery guy shows up. The episode gets its name from it being a tribute to the late Jack Kirby, one of the most influential comic artists of the 20th century. He also got a tribute in an episode of Superman the Animated Series Volume 3. I did a video on that a few years back if you want to go watch that. Anyway, Donatello meets Kirby in the basement and he has this pen that can make drawings come to life and the two go on an adventure. Good episode. In fact, it's Sam Riegel's favorite episode of the show as he got to be part of a massive tribute to Jack Kirby. Kirby himself being voiced by Mike Pollock, who also got to narrate all the DVD extras and 4Kids commercials for the show.
Collect all the adventures of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles!
Funny story, actually. I was watching the DVDs for this show to get footage of the behind-the-scenes material, and I looked down at my phone for a minute and heard a trailer for Sonic Heroes. I can't escape the series even if I wanted to. But the story ramps up again in episodes 17 and 18, The Shredder Strikes Back Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 focuses on Leo going out for training exercises in the morning while the rest of the group is back at April's place. Right away, Leonardo is attacked by the entire Foot clan. Every time he takes down a roof full of goons, they just keep sending more his way as he faces everything we've come to see thus far in the show. The regular Foot ninjas, the Foot tech ninjas that Stockman made, and Hun. The episode reminds us that Leonardo is easily the most powerful of the group, managing to face down this entire army and even beating the Foot tech ninjas without gadgets. But it doesn't really matter how many enemies he defeats, the point is to wear him down and lead him to foes we've never seen before, the elite Foot ninjas. Needless to say, they beat the crap out of him, sending him flying through the window at April's, ending Part 1 in this iconic Shredder moment. I mean, just look at it. Part 1 was really strong, action was on point, the visuals were excellent, and the story was suspenseful, especially if you've never read the comics or watched the first movie. The movie changed it to where Raphael was the one who got in a fight with the Foot and sent through the skylight at April's, but still. Part 1 was really good, but Part 2 might be my favorite episode of the whole show. Definitely my pick for best episode in Season 1. The group has to deal with how they're going to get Leo out of here, and the fact that the Shredder is back, but to make it worse, the Foot army begins attacking April's apartment as they need to fight for their lives. A couple times in the series thus far, they've overused the effect where you don't actually see any fighting, just cut to bodies falling to the ground or something like that. But in this episode, the action is intense and non-stop. By episode 18, an individual Foot goon isn't the challenge it was in episode 1, but it's still an army. The plan is to force the Turtles downstairs into an ambush by the Foot elite. Fast-paced action is a really great thing, but this is action with stakes. Leo is on the brink of dying, and April is with them who has no ninja skills at all. It's an episode with mostly action that's also a great character episode for both the good guys and the bad guys. Starting with the character who doesn't get any action in Part 2, Leonardo. Despite barely being able to move, his first line is,
Where are my swords?
He really wants to keep fighting because it's his family at stake. He even says this to April a moment later.
Leave me. Get away if you can. This is our fight, not yours.
Leading to April's role in this episode.
Not my fight? Look, Leo, we're all family now. I could never run out on you. Let's go.
She was given the choice to leave, but she stays to help the new family, even standing up to a guy like Hun who's like 3 times her size. Master Splinter is also great in this episode. I always liked this part where it's just him against like 15 Foot goons and he drops his cane and then shows off what he was saying to Leo a few episodes back.
In the hands of a true ninjutsu master, anything can be a deadly weapon.
The heroes survive the Foot Elite, but that's when Shredder enters. Like I said, the plan is to keep sending ninjas in to wear the group down, leading them to Shredder, who's still the most powerful foe of them all. But I can get back to him in a moment. When the episode reaches the lowest point, Casey makes a dramatic entrance to save the day. This scene's a good opportunity to praise another thing I love about the show. The music has a bunch of character themes that get used frequently, and this creates a mental association where you instantly recognize the tone of a scene just by hearing the music. Like how each time the Foot Ninjas show up, you hear this. Overwhelming odds, a fight being inevitable is what you think of when you hear that. Character themes can also establish who the central character of a moment is. This episode is a perfect example of it when Casey shows up.
This can't be the band. I want rock and roll, man. Good thing I brought my own drumsticks. Now, who wants to beat a drum? Goongala! Goongala!
Like, he just stole the spotlight straight from the Foot. One of Casey's best moments in the show. Back to the villains. Hun then bursts through the door and he decides to try and take out April and Leo because he's a coward.
Losing you should take the fight out of them.
Hun, never, ever threaten her!
If you've been watching thus far, you know Casey and Hun have history, which makes this quick scene really impactful. And you see the fact that Casey and April kinda like each other, even if all they're seen doing is arguing. Seriously, this episode is so good, like every character is written to absolute perfection here. Hun clearly learned the tactic of picking on the weakest links from his master, the Shredder, because he then tries to kill Leo as well, but then Splinter's all like,
No! You strike a wounded warrior. You have no honor.
I fight to win.
damn, what an evil douche. Splinter starts getting beat by Shredder and Leo's like, and Splinter sees that this is a losing battle that'll cost his family everything, and the group decides to retreat to the storage room in the back. But then Shredder still gets the last laugh.
Like the phoenix, I have risen from the ashes. And into my fire, you shall fall.
As if this wasn't good enough, the Turtles, Splinter, Casey, and April blow up inside the building. The Guardians showed up too late to help them, and then you get "to be continued?" ? You might think that's just whatever. I mean, the show will be back next week, right? Actually, no. This was an intentional episode to take a mid-season break on. This is the kind of thing you can't really appreciate when binging a show, but when you look back at the records, The Shredder Strikes Back Part 2 aired on June 14th of 2003. But the next episode, Tales of Leo, didn't air until September 13th of 2003. That's almost 3 full months of not seeing the next chapter. If you were a kid watching this, that's a long time, making the ending of Shredder Strikes Back Part 2 even stronger. I hope I made it clear why I love this episode so much. Like I said, it's one of my favorites in the whole show because the action was spectacular, but the character drama was even better. I have seen it like 1,000 times at this point and it never gets old. Because of that, I can tell you a lot of things wrong with it too, like how this foot goon just pops out of existence after going down, or continuity errors in the animation like Donatello losing his staff at this point and then just having it in the next shot. Or the Turtles getting beat by Shredder at the door of April's place but then being seen by the window that Casey busts through. Funniest of all being the part where they retreat at the end. Donatello is not seen entering the storage room, nor is he in it when Mikey closes it. The animators just forgot to put him in. These things are funny to notice, especially in things I don't like. But when I'm thrilled with the spectacle and drama, I'm completely sold. I mentioned before that the next episode is Tales of Leo, where they try to keep the suspense going for as long as possible, doing the usual recap stinger at the beginning, but this time it's Shredder narrating it, not one of the Turtles. Also confirming that it was part of his plan to leave the Turtles alone for a bit after they assumed he was dead, to then strike with all his might when they least expected it. When the episode begins proper, we see the group escape the building right as it explodes. To escape the city, the group heads north for Casey's family farmhouse that has been abandoned in the time since his grandmother passed away. After an episode like The Shredder Strikes Back Part 2, they decided to relax for one episode as the entire story is just the group hoping Leo regains consciousness, telling memories about him and how he's always been there for them ever since he was a kid. Sure, there's no big action set piece in this episode, but it's a credit to the show that by this point you care about the characters enough to where you don't need one for it to be a compelling story. This episode and the last one make you wonder what's going to happen to these characters because they aren't invincible. They won't always win. But what is a guarantee is that this group is a family, shown by how nobody here is worried about Shredder. They want Leo to be okay above all else. Speaking of the bad guys, that's the B story, as Shredder is pissed off that there were no bodies at the building, as Stockman proposes that he'll find proof the turtles are dead in exchange for full access to the artifact from the river they found in episode 6, which Stockman plans to use to get revenge on Shredder for all of his punishments he's received. Leading into episode 20, Monster Hunter, that just focuses on the turtles with an A story and a B story. The A plot is that Mikey got seen by someone in the woods, and now a monster hunting show is here to find him, as he, Donnie, and Casey deal with that. As it turns out that there is a real monster that they try to save. Splinter also getting in some one-liners every now and again.
I can't believe you bozos walked right into a trap.
I believe it.
It's an enjoyable episode that furthers the character relationships like Casey and April's, as well as Leo and Raph's, which is the B story.
I let everyone down. I lost my swords.
Hang on, Leo. I wasn't gonna say anything like that.
The two of them crafting Leo some new swords.
I was gonna ask you what you're doing out here.
Nothing.
Well, that's too bad, because I know exactly what you should be doing, and I think you do too.
Setting up the next big episode at the end.
I think it's time we return to New York and finish our business with the Shredder once and for all.
Episodes 21, 22, and 23 return to New York. Probably the best set of episodes all season. Not my favorite, since I just went into that a few moments ago, but it's impossible not to love Return to New York. It's everything the series was building up to and then some. The plot simply being that the group makes it back to the lair and plans their attack on Foot HQ. April and Casey monitoring the situation from the lair, and the turtles setting off on the mission.
We're gonna be a 4-turtle wrecking crew.
5. Let's roll.
The setup is that the Turtles and Splinter will fight through every single floor of this massive building to face the Shredder. In it, there are many great character moments, like how Leo has some doubt about his ability, knowing he'll have to face the Foot Elite again. The story thus far has not been for nothing, as the Turtles kept the Sword of Tengu after episode 6 and are going to bring it with them to use against the Shredder in this episode. The action itself is top tier for season 1. You'd hope it would be. After all, it is a story based around action, but it's worth repeating because in this 3-part episode they keep finding new ways to make the action exciting. They fight regular Foot goons, of course, but each floor has some new enemy to deal with, like a floor of action dedicated to the Turtles battling the Foot Tech Ninjas. Part 1 ending on, and Part 2 beginning with a Foot genetics lab akin to the one from the Notes from the Underground arc, only now mutated Shredder clones are inside. They don't miss a single chance to maximize the drama of the story, as in one moment Don loses his headphones and April can't reach them for a bit. Raph gets stuck between Hun with a giant laser and the Shredder clones, who only get killed off by dropping an elevator on them. April can so easily hack into the system because Stockman is almost ready for his master plan and wants the extra chaos. This hallway is littered with spikes and saws they have to get past, and when you thought it couldn't get any crazier at Shredder's HQ, they reach the Foot Mystics. 5 elemental-based monsters, and Master Splinter uses the Sword of Tengu to stop them, only without the protective glove. I hope it's clear what I mean when I say that they don't miss a beat when it comes to drama and suspense, while still including character moments like this when they reach the elevator that'll bring them right to Shredder.
There is no turning back now. But no matter what happens today, I have never been more proud of you all. My ninja. My sons.
I think placing the final action set piece right in Shredder's chamber was a great idea. I mean, every bad guy meeting scene in the season has taken place in this room, and now the Turtles have what they hope is the final battle with him right here. When you think it couldn't get any better, Part 2 ends on the note of Stockman appearing in his super robot suit. He wants to destroy the Turtles, Hun, and Shredder. I always chuckle when Shredder still thinks he has control over Stockman here, and he goes, "You blind, ignorant, self-important fool." The fight with Stockman is another great bit, as his machine is sturdy enough for him to keep coming back every time they think he's down. Stockman's lines and delivery in this episode is a prime example of why I find him funny. Like, he keeps reminding Shredder of his having paid for this suit.
I spared no expense. And why should I? After all, you were footing the bill, Shredder.
I also like this part where Leo says,
What do we have to do to stop this guy?
I have asked myself that question many times.
like, Shredder just stops hating the Turtles for a minute, is like, yeah man, this bitch just won't quit. But once he's defeated, we get to the final fight. By this point, the audience has seen several action scenes in one episode, but this one is easily the best. Master Splinter gets taken out of the battle early on, meaning it's just the Turtles against Shredder in a fight to the death, and it's a satisfying moment for them to finally start winning against him since we've had 22 episodes of build up to it. the characters have grown a lot in one season, and that's obvious just by watching the action scenes alone. I'm serious, this finale is great. The Turtles beat the Foot Elite once and for all, the Guardians actually show up to help, the Sword of Tengu comes into play as they battle over it, ending with Leo cutting Shredder's head off. What a shocking finish for a Saturday morning cartoon. But it comes with a price because Splinter disappears from where Leo left him earlier, setting up for the next episode arc. Return to New York ends in another really memorable image as we find out why 4Kids allowed a decapitation to air. Whatever this guy is, it isn't human. Return to New York is not the final episode of Season 1, but it's basically where the plot of Season 1 is wrapped up. The Turtles having battled through Shredder's building, destroying it, and finally having defeated him is the moment where the first overarching plot of the series, the Turtles exploring their surroundings more than ever thought possible in Episode 1, is concluded. As the next 3 episodes set up Season 2 with the group trying to find Splinter. The season ends in Episodes 25 and 26, The Search for Splinter Part 1 and Part 2. The Turtles remember that the Guardians could have a lead on Splinter and track them down to the TCRI building run by a Mr. Mortu. TCRI having been printed on the canister of ooze that mutated the Turtles in the first place. This being something you can actually see in the flashback from Episode 3 if you're an attentive fan. The TCRI building has a lot of good set pieces on the inside, like Casey trying to distract the front desk while the Turtles sneak in.
I gotta complain about one of your products.
Sir, this is a Wendy's. Donatello has a fake pigeon in his bag of gadgets, something that Peter Laird really wanted them to do to put in as a reference to the comics. The floor is all being amazed when the Turtles get inside, and then the grand reveal. The fact that the people who run this building are all slimy alien bugs that have Master Splinter in stasis. Before they can even do anything, they get attacked by the aliens and backed onto a teleportation device that warps the Turtles off-world, ending Season 1 on that note. As a final episode, I don't really have that much to say because, as I said a moment ago, this episode arc is meant to transition us from Season 1 to Season 2, leaving you curious about many things. Like, what are these aliens? What are they doing on Earth? Why did they take Splinter? And what's going to happen to the Turtles? Now that we know the Guardians protect these aliens, what does that mean for the Shredder who is hunting them? All questions to be addressed in Season 2, because by the time this episode aired, they already knew they had a hit on their hands. In mid-2003, it was announced that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were getting renewed for Season 2. And that's all the time we have for today. Originally, this was supposed to be like one big video about the whole show, but I decided to cut it up into individual season videos, kind of like the DCAU Retrospective. So next week, we'll be doing the Season 2 video and talking about the aftermath of Season 1 and the success and all that stuff. You can find it on Patreon right now, or you can wait for next week for that video to drop. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this introductory video to the 2003 series retrospective. Because like I said, there's going to be more of them, and they're going to start dropping next week. In the meantime, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. As always, I'd like to thank the patrons who make this video possible. The Tier 2 patrons are getting their names displayed on the screen right now, and the Tier 3 patrons pay extra to get their names read out loud. Those being Caleb Escobar, Chris Delgado, Hazel Zero, Aaron the Atom, Paragree, The Squeaker Nerd, Protector of Memes, Daxter A. Valancourt, Jepson 2.0, Kaiko Blur, Kyler Lehman, Bo Blocks, Joe, Michael Caboose, Your Boy Joe, Avatar Aiden YT, Icarus 10032, 8-Bit Bio, Myopa Game, Jay Seiya Joe Star, Lightning Angel Seda, Quentin is Clones, Shungoku Zero, and Adonius Smith. Thanks again.